welcome to the Redevelopment Commission meeting of October 7th, 2024. We'll start the meeting with a roll call, please.
Randy Cassidy, present.
John West, present.
And Deborah Meyerson here. And we hear from staff present, please.
Anna Hansen, hand. Christina Finley, hand.
Larry Allen Regal.
Jessica McClellan, City Controller.
Jane Coopersmith, Economic and Sustainable Development.
Tim Street, Parks and Recreation. Roy Aiton, Engineering Department.
Holly Warren, Economic and Sustainable Development.
Matt Swinney, hand.
We've got a full house. Next on our agenda, we have a reading of the minutes. We have any questions or comments from commissioners? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next item, we have our examination of claims from September 27th, 2024 for $342,259 and some change. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
I have a question. And I'm not looking for individual invoices here. It's a general question. On page 3 of 6, we've got invoices for Crossroad Engineers, which total approximately $195,000. Is that all part of the Hopewell budget, or is any of this outside of what's already been budgeted?
What project though?
So this
It says
is
Jackson.
this is for
Crossroad
Jackson.
Engineers for Second Street.
It's
Jackson.
what Jackson Street, I think, is all, they all say Jackson Street.
That should be all part of the Hopewell. It should be. I'm not sure if they included Jackson Creek though on the Hopewell form. It's Kendall's project. I apologize. So I don't have.
Well, I didn't forewarn anybody that I was gonna ask that question, which I'm supposed to do, but I'm late getting to this.
This is part of the budget, so this is part of the Ready Grant process and the engineering doing for Jackson Street. So if you'll recall, we brought back to you as part of that project and part of the overall Hopewell project, we brought to you additional engineering for Jackson Street and the Ready project because it was modified a little bit. We shortened Jackson Street as part of the Ready project and diverted some of those funds to redo portions of Rogers Street. And so this is for that extra work of engineering that was part of that program, but it is a part under the Hopewell. It's already budgeted for and planned for, and it's part
all
of it.
within the scope of what we've approved.
Correct.
Yep. So I found it here. Yeah. It's
Okay.
on our sheet. It's on.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Let me just say. Yeah, the only other question I got, we've got Crossroads again underneath the West 17th. So that's for the Beeline extension though.
Crossroad Engineer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So two separate projects we're doing.
On the, for West 17th Street?
West 17th
Yeah, out that district. Yeah, that would be Beeline. They're doing construction inspection for us.
for that, okay. The only other question I got is Indiana Gas for 627 North Morton.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
What's the question about?
Well, the only question is that facility is just a building we're utilizing for.
The facility is mixed, actually, so there are apartments above it, and then there's office space below it. There's actually 2 sets of office space below it, and it does have gas in there.
Okay. And we're using it for the city for redevelopment purposes?
Correct. I can't tell you right now as of like this immediate moment what the current use is of the office space, what it had been. So typically what we've done, and I don't know if this may be the use and somebody may be able to weigh in, is we typically use it for construction office space, particularly
Okay.
for the Trades District as those projects have run through. Last year for a period of time, it was also the innovation office. And so there were trainings that were had in there and places for people to create new projects with the city's innovation department. That has shifted. I know it's being utilized by parts of the city. I'm just not sure if there's been a dedicated use in the last couple of months.
Okay, appreciate that, thank you.
I'll move approval of claims for September 27th, 2024.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have the payroll register from September 20th, 2024. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
I'll move approval of payroll for September 20th, 2024.
I'll second.
Thank you for the first and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Next, we'll move to the report of officers and committees. Is there a director's report?
I do not have a formal report. Happy to answer questions. I do have a request, however. We are now at the season for our Citizen Advisory Commission. We need an RDC member on each social services and physical improvements boards. So we are entertaining RDC members that would like to volunteer a couple of evenings to help us identify the projects for our CDBG. Now, I can also send out an email to the entire commission because it's not fair to all three of you to be put on all of. Not on purpose, just timing wise, we need to get some commission members on there.
Do you know the commitment dates for that?
Yeah, that's what I'm
That's
looking
because that makes a big
Matt,
difference.
Do you remember what it's November?
Yeah, it starts in November. It's probably altogether around, I'd say, 4 meetings or so. It's not a very extensive.
Between
It's more the
November and
specific
December?
dates, yeah.
Is that-
Yeah.
It's more the specific dates, so if you do follow up with an email,
Yep.
just to provide the exact dates, just because
Most
that would help.
meetings are on Thursday evenings. So,
I did the physical last time I was on the RDC, and I would commit to that again, subject to the schedule.
Okay, great. I will send out a formal email with dates, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Anything else from the director?
No,
Okay.
happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Legal report?
Just very briefly, so as you may recall, the RDC had approved the issuance of refunding bonds to go to market. We anticipate that Baird is ready to put that out actually to the market. We anticipate that'll be tomorrow. There was a pre-pricing call, so essentially what Baird's current most up-to-date estimates are going to be on those bond terms, just kind of in terms of just to run through the quick highlights from that pre-pricing call that we had. The rating is steady. It's the same that it has been, so we're maintaining our very good bond rating for the TIF. We believe that the amount of the bonds will still be roughly in the amount of 27 million, 27.72 million. And additionally, the estimated net present value of savings is a little bit higher than what we even estimated. I think originally our conservative estimate was $1.1 million of net present value savings. We anticipate that'll be more like 1.3 to 1.4. So this will open up a purchase period for the bonds that'll start tomorrow that Baird will run. And so we'll also have a post-pricing call just to see what the results of those were and what our actual realized amounts were. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. Additionally, for the president, we're also going to have some signatures that are necessary to get that pricing out. So you'll see those signature pages this evening. That was part of that original approval. It's just, this is one of the steps in the process to sell the bonds.
So when you're talking about the ratings, are we talking A minus?
So in this case, so we have maintained a AA rating just in terms of our credit enhancement. The bonds for themselves from the S&P will be A minus because they're pure TIF bond, which is fairly good, and that's what we've seen in our past bond issuances, which is a steady positive amount. So.
Okay, because it's pure TIF.
Yep.
And until this offering's out, we won't know what the interest rate carry is.
We have maximum parameters. There are estimates for those, but that's correct. We won't know what we've actually realized until. It can't exceed the maximum parameters, and based on the, yeah.
But what are those parameters?
The maximum parameters for us was 4.25%, and I think we're estimating that it might be more like 3.8%.
And we'll know where we stand next month at RDC.
Yep.
Typically.
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's when we're going to have the post-pricing call. It'll be whenever that happens. But so yeah.
Thank you. Do we have a treasurer's report?
good evening, Commissioners. Jessica McClellan, City Controller. I passed out the TIF project report. Tonight, we have some updates to the fund commitments in Hopewell. Last meeting, you added Belcher fencing and Woods Electrical. for a total of about $29,000, and that's reflected in your fund commitment. So tonight you'll have things that you'll add, and that will be reflected in the fund commitment next time. We had a lot of spending, additional spending in Hopewell since we had this report last. And the remaining balance is this $7.7 million in Hopewell, which is just the fund commitment that has been approved by the board minus what's been expended. So we go kind of through that process for all the different projects. We have so we had some updates to this total trades district spending. Any additions that you do in your meetings to this fund commitment will be updated. There were no updates. Actually, this trades district in the garage, I believe there are actually no changes in that spending. It was the forge. We're working through those, like getting those TIF commitments finalized and what those projects are going to be. And then we had updates in the Beeline spending, the Beeline Trail extension and the multi-use path and 17th Street. We had some more additional spending that Jim questioned, some expenses in the claims, and so that was also reflected in the updated spending in that project. We've added the project that was in the Kinzer Prow TIF. It was the Griffey Dam Trail. That project is complete. It didn't have any other expenses, but I wanted to put that in there so that you knew what that project was. Larry went over the bond issuance with you. That is happening soon, and we'll keep you up to date on that. And I think that we're going to keep getting you updated on how to do a budget for next year and a spending plan, working with our advisor.
We are scheduled for our retreat on October 30th.
Okay, great. All right. Do you have any? Yes.
It might be beneficial if in this same report, if you'd also give us the TIF, the total TIF balance.
Would
So
love
there'll
to
only
do
be
that.
two, downtown and
agree.
Kinzer.
And I was kind of thinking along those lines too, as I'm doing this report, we need to see the total picture too. So yeah, we'll put that in
Any way
too.
you want to put it on.
Put it on, absolutely.
I have a question, which is, how does this report become part of the public record? Because it's not in the meeting packet tonight.
Well, I pass it off to Christina to include in the minutes. Is that true?
Well, we need it in the packet.
I see.
So we'll make sure this one's included in the minutes, I think, going forward, as long as we can get it ahead of time before the packet goes out, we can include it in the packet. So we may just change the deadlines for it.
When would it need to be received in order to become in the meeting packet?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
When would this report need to be received, let's say by the hand department, since you're putting together the packet, in order to be included in the packet?
The day before the packet goes out.
Okay.
I think Wednesday,
That-
usually
yeah.
Wednesday before the meeting is when we've asked everybody to get materials in for the packet, just so we can give it a once over as well. So Wednesday, Thursday at the latest.
Okay, so is that something that will
Yeah,
work
we
for
can do
next
that.
time? Just because it's easier for me to keep track of stuff,
Yeah.
just if it's all in the meeting
In
packet.
the meeting
so.
packet, I understand.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do we have a business development update?
Hi, Holly has an update for us.
Okay.
Hey everybody, my name is Holly Warren. I'm the Assistant Director for the Arts in the Department of Economic and Sustainable Development. You have been with us for almost 5 years of trying to get our trades district, One Person for the Art project OT987 by Berlin-based artist Stefan Ries, in the ground. It's been a long, fun, a little crazy COVID impact public art project, but we are finally almost there, and I want to express gratitude for you all being there and being there for the process and funding fabrications and fun things like that. So I just want to give you a little update about where we are now. In June, the artist visited Weber Fabricators, whose contract you approved to fabricate this piece. The artist went to their studio in Jeffersonville, Indiana, to paint the piece, and then he came up to Bloomington, Indiana, to see the site in person for the first time. That was super great. In the meantime, Weber, who is our fabricator, have installed all the LED lights that will go into the 13 beams that comprise this piece of work. So once the piece is erected, it will be these 13 very cool and colorful beams that are very tall that are illuminated by LED lights that run on about a 20-minute lighting program. So that work has all been done. So basically, the piece is fabricated and in a warehouse down in Jeffersonville, Indiana. While this install and fabrication work was being done down in Jefferson, Indiana, we were looking at what it would take to get this piece to stand up in the ground safely with a structural engineer. And once we figured out with that structural engineer and our colleagues in our city's engineering department, we were like, oh my goodness gracious, we are going to need to pour a pretty thick concrete foundation for this piece. So again, we worked with the structural engineer and our engineering department to put out a bid for a concrete contractor to pour this. We got a successful bid a couple of weeks ago, and that concrete pour is going to happen between now and the beginning of November. So this is super exciting. Once this concrete is poured, all of the elements are going to be in place for this piece to actually be installed. However, because of the weather and the artist's schedule, we have agreed that this is going to be a spring install. So we are looking at a March, April 2025 install date. I have to apologize to John Fernandez, who's in the room, because I know we're all looking forward to the opening of the Forge later this fall. So the piece won't be up by then, but I'm looking forward to this being a really exciting piece to celebrate in April of next year to kind of increase excitement around all the development in the Trades District, including all the work that has come out of this grant between IU, the mill, and the city. I'm happy to answer any questions about this. Again, this project feels more and more real to me every day. All the pieces are there. It's just a matter of getting everybody to descend onto Bloomington in early spring to realize this piece in person, and then we'll have a big old celebration.
Can you, remind me, because I wasn't here last year, where is the piece being installed?
Sure. So the piece is going in at kind of at 10th Street as you're coming into the Trades District, where that concrete seating area is. So it's kind of like at the corner of 10th and Maker's Way. Do I have that right? Someone might need to. Is that correct? So what's really great about this location is the piece is going to be visible as folks are heading south on College and as they're coming into the district down 10th Street. So I think it's a really pivotal area and kind of almost like a gateway piece that is going to say, hey, y'all, here's this new and awesome place that's developing in town. One of the things that has held us back is the original piece where the original site for this was not a wise site, and we learned last fall that we were going to have to move it to a new site where there was not a stormwater retention tank under it. So that's one of the things that's made this process take as long as it has.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that update.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Appreciate it. Look forward to it.
Yeah,
April.
finally.
Yeah.
Next on our agenda, we have a Hopewell update. Deb, are you available for that?
I am. Yeah, just super quickly, I know we've got a few items in our new business, so I'll be short. Just wanted to remind everybody that there is a public info session for Hopewell on October 23rd. It'll be at 5:30 at the Weldon Arts Center. And so you want to put that on your calendar, and the communications and promotions have started going out. And I'll defer the rest of my time to the items of our new business.
Thank you. Well, we will continue on our agenda. We have, sorry, scrolling back up here. We have Resolution 24-67, which is an approval of an agreement for public art in Hopewell East. Who would like to speak to that?
Hi, it's Holly again, Assistant Director for the Arts, City of Bloomington. We have in the City of Bloomington something called the 1% for the Arts Ordinance. And this is an ordinance that says that anytime the city undertakes a new piece of public construction, 1% of that overall budget must be allocated to art. That's one reason why we're going to have OT 987 in the spring. So we had that same ordinance apply to Hopewell overall the development. So the overall budget for 1% for the arts in Hopewell is $190,000. And I worked with the Bloomington Arts Commission to make the determination that 100,000 of that total amount could be allocated for a 1% for the Arts Project in Hopewell Commons, which is that first area of the development that we see happening right now. It's super duper exciting. So once the BAC decided that was the amount of money that we were going to work with, I worked with a recommendation committee. So this is a committee that was made up of members of the Bloomington Public Art Subcommittee. So these are folks within the Bloomington Arts Commission who focus on public art, and other members of the city staff to determine what this call process was going to look like. And they were also the ones that helped select the artists. So the call process was, we started with a call for qualifications. So this is just when we put a call out into the world and say, hey, artists, we want to see some kind of magnificent piece of public art in Hopewell Commons. Show us that you've done this before. Show us that you have the technical skills to put something amazing in the ground in this area. So we got a round of applicants based on that, and then we worked with this recommendation committee to narrow that group down to a set of 4 finalists. Each of those 4 finalists were invited to submit an actual proposal for what would go in the ground at Hopewell Commons. So once we got those proposals back, we shared all of those proposals with the public, and we opened up a portal for the public to give their feedback. In addition to that, this recommendation committee also interviewed the 4 finalists just to learn what their real vision was, get to know them better, get to understand their connection with Bloomington better, and determine whether or not they would be a good fit for our vision and what the city is looking for here. And so after doing the interviews and considering the public feedback and looking at the proposals and making sure that the artists knew what it took to make this thing happen in this place, we decided to make the recommendation to this commission that we go with the piece Undulate by local artist John Rasick. So that's what I'm here to recommend to you all tonight. You should see some images of the piece in your packet, but basically, this is a really cool piece of public art. One of the things this recommendation committee talked a lot about is, like, Hopewell Commons is pretty grand, right? And we don't want necessarily a piece of what some people call a plop art. You just plop a sculpture down in one place on this large site, and then you leave it there and you don't think about it. You don't think about how the community is going to interact with this. We were thinking about, what if someone could make a piece that just kind of manifests in multiple places around the commons so people can see it not just in one place? And without saying that publicly or to just really to anybody outside of our conversations, John just delivered exactly that. So what you'll see is a piece that kind of undulates and flows in many different areas around the west side of the commons. And it's also a piece that includes seating, so folks can sit with it. He also was like, folks can take Instagram photos with it. Some people really like that. Some people don't like that at public art, but I think our community will really enjoy that. So that's what we selected. I also want to share that our recommendation choice of John's piece also aligned with where the public put most of their public feedback on each of the 4 pieces. Happy to answer any questions.
So I know the public can't see the image that was included in our packet present, but on that, this runnel that we have going through it, that's just part of the overall project as a whole, and this is just fitting in between. So as we look at this, and I know the structural aspect, which was mentioned in our packet, and what you just identified on the other, that's got to be worked out. Is that going to create any issues at all in regards to, and this may be a Roy question.
Sure, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the question,
yeah,
the question I'm asking, Roy, in regards to as we move forward and we get the Hopewell Commons done and we're putting this art piece, is this a coordination from a construction standpoint where we're not going to have to go and tear up a whole lot?
So we selected areas where we kind of told the artists where they could go that did not conflict with what was going on with the construction. Our construction will be finished up before this piece goes in, and we've left holes for them.
Okay.
So there's been coordination.
Yeah, so we won't have anything where we're tearing up something that we've just done.
I don't anticipate, I don't think we're gonna allow that,
Okay.
to be honest, yeah. So we're working with them still to figure out exactly where the locations will be and what can support what. So we're kind of merging the two together, but
Perfect.
the idea is not to degrade any of the infrastructure we've already put in,
Well-
but just to add to it with this.
Yeah. The combination of art and engineering, I think, will work together in order to make the right thing down there. So it looks good. And now, time frame. I have to ask.
So, yes,
based
of
upon
course, yeah.
COVID.
And- yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right, we
so
don't have a pandemic.
John Rasik, the artist, Roy and Tim Street from Parks and I have already met together once to start talking about this. Roy and Tim were actually also part of the recommendation committee because again, we just wanted to make sure that we're not going to be dealing with another OT 987 and all the crazy infrastructure redoing that we had to do with that piece. So when we met with John a couple of weeks ago, we discussed an installation time of June 2025.
Oh.
So yeah,
Okay.
so relatively quick. And again, I do feel like this is like, it's been a joy working with colleagues in parks and engineering. And I think because we've been looking at the plans and saying, okay, this can go here, but not here, and this is what we can do and we can't do here, I feel like we're gonna be on track for that. I don't wanna say June 1st, it will definitely be in the ground because I found every time I say that I jinx it, but I think we're gonna be much closer than 5 years, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Question.
Yes.
My question is post-installation.
Mhm.
I suspect that at some point in time, this will need some repair,
course,
some maintenance.
yes.
And I'd like to know how we're gonna do that, who's gonna do that, and how it gets paid for.
Sure. So I have a annual $20,000 art repair fund, which is for things just like this. So, and also when we do a contract with an artist to produce a big piece of public art, one of the expectations is they create for us a maintenance manual. We won't give them their last payment until they say, okay, these are the materials to fix this piece. This is what you will need. These are the color palettes, so you can match the color exactly if something needs to be repainted. And generally what we do is, and these options, like especially for this option, John Rasik is a local artist versus someone like Stefan who's doing OT 987, who lives in Berlin. We'll always give the artist the first option to be the person to make the repair because obviously they know it the best, right? But again, the expectation is you give us this manual, so if, say, 3 to 5 years from now, it's tagged or like it gets dented or something and you have moved on, we have all the information we need to repair the piece, and I will, again, have that budget just as part of my annual general fund budget to take care of it.
So, short answer is it's your problem.
It's my problem, yes, but that's why I'm here, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that there was this public, portal as part of this. The memo didn't mention the actual selection committee. You mentioned a mix of different department members and members of the art commission. Is there anything public in terms of who the final selection committee was that's available? Just because it's kind of part of the whole process, right?
We'll do a better job of that going forward. So again, in most announcements, I think the way we framed it is that there is a committee that has been put together that is comprised of members of the Arts Commission and city staff that are going to be responsible for making that selection. I don't think we ever got to the point to name names. I'm happy. I mean, I've already named 2 of them. I'm happy to name others if that's helpful as well.
I just wanted to jump in because we have had some questions about the makeup of this committee. I wanted to clarify, it's a recommendation committee. We've colloquially been calling it the selection committee, but they were not making a selection. They are making a recommendation to you.
Correct.
The RDC makes a selection. And it was made up of members of BAC, staff, and public, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And at no time was
Yeah.
there a quorum from
Correct.
of BAC during the meetings.
Yes,
So.
and we were very hypersensitive to this. Whenever we are discussing applications of artists, in what could potentially be a public meeting, I'm very sensitive to this. So when we were making the plans to interview the artists and to meet as a recommendation committee, I checked in with our corporation counsel multiple times to make sure that everything was above the board and that we were abiding by open door policy when we were doing this.
So it was a publicly posted meeting?
It was not,
Oh.
but I
It wasn't
confirmed,
required.
correct, yeah. I confirmed that that was okay and appropriate with Corporation Counsel before making that call.
Sure, thanks. So how do you use in terms of the public feedback versus what the recommendation committee was looking at? How does that all factor in terms of how you made the selection?
So we got 500 folks responded to that feedback. So, and so there, we asked general questions, how do you feel about this? Would you visit this? But we also said, which do you like the best? And so once we had all that information compiled, before we went into our meeting to start discussing who we were going to recommend, that information was shared with all of the committee members to review. So we could use what folks were saying about, I don't feel like I can necessarily interact with this piece, as an older person, or I would love to have my photo taken in front of this piece to just inform generally what our decision was. But again, I was actually very heartened to see that the way the public responded was very much in alignment with how the committee responded to the work as well.
Sure.
The committee members completed a more detailed questionnaire,
Correct,
right?
yes.
And that got into more functional aspects of the implementation of the art. And then they were able to dig in with the artists directly during the interview process and really kind of get in a little more detail as well.
Yes.
So they were considering some different factors, but came to the same conclusion.
Sure. And so is any of that stuff public? I'm just curious in terms of like the public portal and the survey and just like, I was just curious of like, I'd be curious I had my own opinions, right? But just kind of curious what other people thought, and obviously it's all anonymous, but just kind of wondering.
The documents created would of course be public. Those would be subject to, those would be publicly created documents, so those would be available for public inspection if somebody wanted to see them. And certainly I think we could discuss ways of maybe sharing those if that's appropriate. I will just note in terms of the public nature of the committee, so generally it kind of depends how these committees are formed as to whether they're subject to open door law. In this case, when it's an ad hoc committee that's created by staff, it's not created by a governing body to issue an official recommendation, it's then exempt from open door law. So it doesn't have the same, it's not a board, it doesn't have an official website, it doesn't have to publish its notices because effectively it's a staff internal review thing for Holly's benefit. But any documents that they're compiling, any recommendations, like in terms of actual documents that are created, are subject to public inspection if they're requested. So we may just have to look at that, and that's something we can review, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, because it's nice, it started out as a really nice public process, and so just kind of having like a beginning and an end, because it kind of started out really broad and then kind of followed down to like, here you are, and it's just kind of nice to see how the process worked and what people's thoughts were about it or how that was made. So in terms of the recommendations, it's just, I'm curious about it, so that's what I'm
I
asking.
just might use a different metaphor. Instead of a funnel, think of it as having two different tracks. Think of it as having this broad public component where we collected an enormous amount of public feedback, which is super important in terms of what is considered for the recommendation. And then the second parallel track, which is a lot more, there were experts primarily on this committee. They were asking really technical questions, and they were just doing a different type of analysis. And so that happened.
Sure.
Yeah, railroad tracks.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's definitely important to have both elements to
Yes.
make sure it's practical in the end. And so my last question is, I'm just curious of how does this process compare with how, let's say, the trades district structure was selected or recommended? Like, was there?
I wasn't here
Okay.
when that happened, but my understanding it was very similar. I believe it was a two-part process where they did a call for qualifications first and then followed up with a call for proposals, and then there was public feedback portion for
And
that
I'm
as
just trying to
well.
remember myself because I was here for
Yeah.
some of that. And I'm just trying to regroup or even understand based on like this in front of us and try and kind of regroup from before.
I think ultimately what we did is we took, Holly's exactly right, it was a two-step process, and then we took the proposals kind of broadly, we posted them at a public event that was for the opening of the trades district, had the public vote on which ones were their favorite, and that's kind of the selection.
And this process is very much in alignment with best practices for when you do a public art call. And I think one thing, I feel like, this was my first big 1% call that I've seen from the end to, hopefully, installation. Hopefully, I'm still here in June, y'all. I think that and it's all new. The folks who help me and guide me as members of the Arts Commission, they're all mostly new too. So I think we definitely learned a lot from this process. Are thinking about ways to strengthen it going forward, because we will be doing a couple more public art projects of this scale in the coming year. So we want to make sure that we're always doing the our best practices and honoring the public's feedback. So we're kind of in the process of, based on our experience with the Hopewell one, which I still think was incredibly positive, creating an SOP to make sure that we're always hitting those targets and keeping everybody happy and informed. So,
Okay, good. So when the final recommendation comes, is there a vote? Do y'all just put some numbers in a hat, or what? How does the final recommendation come from the committee?
This was a vote, because it was tough. It was not an easy. All 4 finalists all had very strong things about them, and I loved the committee members because everybody has strong opinions. So there was some back and forth, and at the end we said, okay, let's vote, and that's what we did. So.
And I think from a staff perspective, we walked away feeling like we really hope that we have the opportunity for future engagement with the artists that were not recommended today, that
Yes.
there's just some really wonderful pieces there. And
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No.
Any other questions from commissioners?
All right.
Any public comment on this resolution? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the art as presented.
I'll second. That's resolution 24.
That's resolution.
67.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To me, it's,
Good to
the art's the important
be
part. The
specific,
resolution, that's
make
legal.
sure we're not voting on some other art project.
Right, okay.
So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous, passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Holly.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is Resolution 24-68, approval of property management agreement with Dimension Mill Incorporated for Trades District Tech Center, also known as the Forge. Who would like to speak to that?
Everyone, Jane Cooper Smith. Happy to speak to this resolution. I think I need to not look at the notes. So, yeah, this is the management agreement for the Forge, and John, you can come up too if you want to, I think, that describes and outlines how the mill will engage in the management activities of this facility specifically. It falls underneath the Trades District Management Agreement currently, which is also with the mill. Larry, will you help me? I'm just fumbling for no reason.
So I'd say just sort of broad, just to recap, since if there are members of the public watching also, this is part of the large Economic Development Administration grant that the RDC received to the tune of $3.5 million. Obviously, John Fernandez has been heading this up for some time and getting this over the finish line, which has not been an insignificant process, certainly in terms of funding and getting this going. Part of that EDA grant process, the Redevelopment Commission, along with the City of Bloomington, had several partners. Those included the Dimension Mill, also the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. As part of the agreement, there is a structure in place, because this will be rented space, is to have a property manager. As part of that, it was agreed early on, the initial concept is that a separate nonprofit might be set up, but instead the mill volunteered to become a partner in this and to be able to do this particular management because it fit with the continuation of its mission. So the mill as a nonprofit obviously has been working on cultivating new businesses. That's part of what the Forge is meant to do, is almost like a graduation space. If you could start in the mill and mature your business and you needed some specialized office space, then you have the Forge to potentially move into. That is nearing its completion, and we are ready to start using some of the other agreements you all have seen, a model lease that has come before you for essentially future tenants potentially. This is the next step in that process to formalize that agreement with the Dimension Mill and to become the property manager and to take over those responsibilities as mandated both by the grant agreement but also just the necessity of the redevelopment commission. So there's a couple things maybe just to highlight in this agreement. I'm sure John will have things that he'll want to highlight as well. So there's an initial term of this, which would be upon execution. It lasts until January 1st, 2030, so approximately 5 years. And then there are 3 additional terms of 5 years each that are optional to be added on there. The timing of that, what that mirrors, is the period of time of mandatory ownership under the EDA grant. So under the EDA grant, the term of the grant is that the redevelopment commission and the city are required to own and operate this for a period of 20 years. And so that's what you'll see there in terms of that particular item. The mill will be the primary contact in leasing up the spaces, monitoring some of the build out, also taking care of all the internal items. Because this is a new building, we don't anticipate, even with the best of management, that this is going to be 100% leased out on day one. It'll take some time to do the build outs and lease up. So we have proposed a term there where the RDC would deposit $100,000 in a capital reserve fund to essentially cover any of the gap funding that we would need. So the way the leases are set out for this particular building is that essentially there's an optional build-out period. There will be a necessary build-out for each of the tenants. Once they begin their lease period, it's essentially a triple net lease, which is a lot of things are chargeable back to the tenant. However, until we get fully built out, it's possible that the cost for operating the building will exceed what we can charge back to all the tenants. In the event that that happens, this essentially creates a safety fund that allows the building to continue to operate, to continue to pay staff for that kind of ramping up period. Now, under the EDA grant, my understanding has been that this project is required over its life to become self-sustaining. And so everything we've done in each of these agreements, and even this capital reserve fund, is built towards moving this towards a self-sustaining project where the rents and the revenue all take care of itself. And this is just really for that initial period where we anticipate there could be a potential gap there. In the event that the fund isn't used, or the capital reserve fund isn't potentially used, then or as you get revenue that increases beyond the regular operating, then the RDC will slowly get paid back out of that additional rent potentially. So other highlights, this just goes through management of the building. Largely, there are reporting requirements also back to the EDA of the finances of the building. There are biannual reports that we have to submit. So you'll also see that reflected in the agreement in terms of getting those financial reports from the mill so that we can quickly file them with the EDA so that we're compliant with the grant. So that's, in large part, this agreement is mostly trying to satisfy not just the partnership that we have with the mill, but also making sure we're covering all those EDA grant terms. So John, if you have other stuff.
I'll just make a couple additional comments. Between Jane and Larry, we pretty much covered it. I think the most important thing is that this is consistent with the trades management agreement, the original agreement that put together the relationship between the RDC and the mill to move forward with this building and the broader trades district marketing and development. So these terms were pretty much set out in that original agreement. The second thing is that, we anticipate getting the keys to the building November 1. But there ain't going to be any revenue on November 1 because it's a gray box development, so we still need to do tenant improvements as leases are signed. So there's this initial period where we will have some, I don't want to say de minimis, but some operating expenses with no revenue until we get leased up. And the mill didn't contemplate taking that out of their 2025 budget. So the capital fund is really important to be able to pay those bills in the near term until we begin leasing up the building. additional plans and what were presented in the previous years, that the goal was to be at 50% occupancy in 2025. We believe that will be achieved, but even then, some of those tenants are going to be coming in at different times throughout the year. So we put together some pretty basic models on what we think that cash flow looks like to get to a break-even point, and we think we're on track to be at a break-even probably the end of looks like the beginning of Q2. The operating budget, we have an estimate on what these costs are, and what's contemplated in the lease is for the CAM charges that we have a projected number of what we think those total costs will be per square foot. They'll be adopted or applied pro rata across each lease based on the amount of square footage. At the end of the first year of a lease, we'll do a true up to see where we're at. If our conservative estimates overestimated what those costs will be, we'll credit overpayments towards the next year's lease payments. If we're under budget, then we will increase the CAM charges in the subsequent year to make us whole. Let's see what else. I think another important thing to note is that what's in the management agreement is a tremendous amount of transparency and reporting. If funds are used out of this capital fund, we report that to the Redevelopment Commission, so you know specifically what's being spent, because it can only be used for the intended purposes of covering these operating expenses, so we want to be really transparent about that. We're also required, and frankly glad to do, at a minimum, 2 reports throughout each year to give you an update on how it's operating in terms of lease rates, tenant mix, et cetera. I think those are probably the biggest items, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'll give a run at this. Is there a deadline by which the RDC gets their $100,000 returned?
There's not a deadline, but what the way the agreement's written, John, is that if there are any net proceeds, all those go to the RDC until we hit that 100,000. I think under the 50% pro forma, I think you would probably be made whole by January 2026.
I'd be a lot more comfortable with this agreement if there was a deadline, and it doesn't have to be 2020. It could be 27, it could be 28. I'd like to see a deadline, and then if there has to be an extension for some circumstances, then so be it. But it's a little loosey-goosey for my taste. That's one comment.
There is actually, the deadline is the initial term in the agreement, so it does have to be by the initial term, the end of the 5 years.
It does? It does?
Yeah, and
I
then
didn't see it in
and then
there,
it's
but
part
they
of
were
the
pretty long and
discretion of the controller's office at that point to look at what's going to go on and make a recommendation as to what should be done for after that initial term. That's kind of just acknowledging that there may be a decision that needs to be made ahead of that initial term before we do any extension terms about whether this agreement's working, whether it needs to be a different organization or something like that.
So that wouldn't come before the RDC, it would be before the controller's office?
it would need to. I would
No.
think.
Yeah, any expenditure of extra funds or continuing the obligation would have to come back to the
So there is a
An
deadline.
extension, yeah.
There is a deadline.
Yeah, the deadline's the initial term.
I missed it.
And
So the mill is the property manager. And there's no provision in here for the mill to subcontract to a third party, and my hope is that they wouldn't.
I think that only if you permitted it. There would be no reason for us to do that.
Well, I agree, but
Yeah, let me look at
it's
the
not
layout.
really covered. And I could see a scenario whereby that would happen and then it would not be managed as well as, I guess it's possible it could be managed better, but I wouldn't, we're making a deal with the mill,
No.
and I
It
wouldn't.
says that the mill may not assign this agreement or its obligations or duties hereunder without the prior written approval of the city, which shall not be unreasonably delayed or withheld. So, that's section 10.
What's the, per foot net charges as you estimate them?
Right now, we estimate it as $8.11. And it's a very detailed budget. And we worked with some local property management companies to get a read on what current expenses have been. We modeled some of the operating costs on the mill, because mill's 20,000 square feet. This is 21. Again, this will be a more efficient building in some regards, but there's some costs that probably won't have much variance based on the building.
It's pass-throughs and.
I mean, like your Cisco's and, you know,
They are what they are.
yeah.
I think that covers my questions.
Question in regards to the management and the ZDA grant and such. I mean, this is a required situation for us to access the money to the EDA. Is that a correct statement?
That is because it was part of this is my understanding coming into this project, that because it was part of the application and the structure that was presented to the EDA and approved by the EDA under the application. John obviously knows much more about that, then we
Well,
have to honor that application.
Yeah, I think technically the requirement before you can draw down the money is to have an approved model lease.
Okay.
And so they have looked at the model lease that this group previously reviewed. We actually made the changes that John had suggested.
Because I've not seen a revised lease.
Is it not attached to the packet?
It should be attached, but it was not, but that's my mistake, so we can make sure that that's
I want to read that again.
okay.
We adopted your, I redlined in your comments, John, which I greatly appreciated. They were really good. But before they can, the model lease, since it contemplated us being the management team for the building, they wanted us to submit the actual management agreement so that they could approve the lease. So they're just waiting for us to have an approved management agreement, then the city can resubmit the model lease along with this agreement so that you all can draw down that $3.5 million. And I can start signing leases.
Also, as important, if the structure changed, we'd have to get EDA's permission to kind of change the fundamental structure as well. So obviously the drawdown and the reimbursement is one aspect, but the other aspect is EDA does tightly control this project. They have an invested interest, so any changes to that structure have to be approved and run through the EDA as well.
Yeah.
So it's not a lighthearted process where willy-nilly we can change the structure.
No, the primary question I'm asking is, we need to move forward on this in order to get our drawdown, get a reimbursement going, so we can get that dollars put back in, get leases signed, so we can start getting the money back.
Yeah.
And get our economics going, so we can move forward on the business end of it. The $100,000, where's that coming from?
We'd anticipate, because of what it's going to be used for, in this case, it's probably going to come out of the 444 account. That's something we'll work with the treasurer for about the specific account that it would come out of. I think that would make the most sense because it would get reimbursed back into that account from the revenues resources received. So, and there is money in there to cover this particular payment of $100,000.
So that 444 account would then be at that particular time transferred over to the mill for their operating expenses, and then the accounting will be kept separate. And not to put more work on Jessica, I'm just asking how that financial consideration will be.
Not the whole account. So the mill would set up a separate, like a specific capital
Just
reserve
for
fund.
this.
We would pay the mill, it would go into there, that they would have to keep a separate accounting for. So really sorry, John, the burden's on the mill on that case in terms of the accounting for that, not
Well,
necessarily.
it is and it isn't. I mean, the reason that we really frankly pushed for this was that the alternative is coming here every month to get, $400 for a water bill, and it just, there's a lot of burdens on everyone's time. I mean, we submit all of the the ledger, if you will, on this. We were gonna, I mean, we had proposed originally, and we had talked internally about, we would create this kind of fund anyway. But there's just this, potential 5-month gap, 6-month gap where there's no revenue.
Okay, that works. 444 account, transfers over, they report twice a year. Jessica double checks everything to make sure that all the finances are correct. And if there's any issues, it'll come back, and we've got a 5-year period to recapture our dollars. And if there's any excess, we'll get that.
I should also note another layer of this is also ESD has been doing a significant amount of oversight as well. So they check everything that comes through. That goes through their department as well because they've been the primary contact with the EDA. So there are multiple layers of checks and balances to all that, just to insert that as well.
Okay, and then when we're dealing with the EDA and their reporting period, it'll be the mill, as the property manager, responsible to have all that put together to forward to the city.
Not exactly. I
Okay.
mean, the way the reporting is that the city of Bloomington is the grant holder.
Mhm.
But the way we do it now is that we collectively respond.
Okay.
So Jane's department circulates the update, we put in our information, Weddle Brothers puts in their information, and we have, I mean, it's it's like a shared doc, so it's not
Okay.
super burdensome. But as we go forward, the other piece, there'll be some additional stuff that we want to report, like, outcomes in terms of financials, jobs, number of companies, all the stuff that's in the original grant requirement.
Well, the reason I'm trying to get down is when it comes to making sure that that grant paperwork is put in. At the
ESD is on the hook for
Okay,
EDA
that's-
compliance.
yeah.
We are the responsible
Yes.
party.
Looking to make sure,
Yeah.
because as things change over a period of years, it's 20-year grant, where is the department or the
Yeah.
property manager that's gonna be responsible for making sure we hit those deadlines so that as the RDC and as the city and community as a whole, we're not, it didn't
It's my
happen.
name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, okay, ESD,
Yep.
perfect, okay, thank you.
And it is a team sport.
One more
Yeah.
question. So, kind of the bottom line, so for that property, after we sign the agreement and we provide the reserves, then the RDC has no further responsibility?
That's the objective.
That's subjective.
I mean, I don't mean that flippantly. I mean, yeah, I mean, the goal of this has always been to get this off your plate.
Yeah, we wouldn't anticipate a lot for you on the day-to-day operations. You're still a partner in terms of, it's the city of Bloomington, it's the
You own
redevelopment
it,
commission,
yeah.
and it's the mill. So it's all still a partner in the EDA grant. So we
Right,
can't promise you
I get that part.
that there's never gonna be involvement or there's never gonna be anything that comes up. But essentially, day-to-day operations, yeah, the mill should be handling those
Yeah.
day-to-day operations.
The objective and goal is for the forge, the mill, to be a self-sustaining ecosystem that's going to just put out jobs, economics, and better benefits for our community, without having to come back to the RDC and the TIF or the taxpayers for dollars. I'm good with
They're
that.
doing it.
Yeah,
Was that a question or a statement?
statement more than anything.
Okay.
Just making sure. No, I think we're getting to that final portion to just try to push this forward and get everything done. And, the EDA, it'd be really nice to be able to draw that down before any additional things happen.
Yep.
I do have a remaining question, which is, Larry, you had mentioned that originally was envisioned for the property management function to have a separate subsidiary of the mill, which is not apparently something that's emerged. And I'm just interested in, I can see the advantages of doing that, and I'm wondering, could
Yeah,
that not be prompted in this agreement to have that done?
Actually, Deborah, the original grant envisioned setting, the mill had nothing to do with it. The original grant envisioned that the community would create another nonprofit entity as I think it was called the Trades District Tech Center Corporation. And as the project, was behind, and we were trying to find ways to help move things forward. And I'll take responsibility for this, but my view was, and this was before I even worked at the mill, was we do not need yet another nonprofit entity.
I completely
Yeah.
agree with that. It's more just from a liability standpoint and just even kind of distinguishing the roles and responsibilities of the property management for the forge compared to the mill's own business.
Uh-huh.
And those are different things, even though obviously they're interrelated in terms of the overall goals of the trades district. So I'm just trying to examine further, since I understand that
Yeah.
this is not maybe the original separate nonprofit, and I totally agree that we don't need another nonprofit entity built.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, in terms of how the mill's management, property management for the forge works, just trying to get more clarity on the picture of whether they could or should be producing, let's say, an LLC or something that distinguishes that
If
from a
we
management
own, if we own the
perspective.
building, I would be absolutely with you, but this is a management agreement, it's a service agreement, which is just, part of the mill's operations. If we own the building, yeah, absolutely, I would want to separate it from the nonprofit operation of the mill, but this is just a contract. So I mean, we could do that, but I don't think it's necessary in this case.
Okay,
If we own the land, definitely.
I
Or the
think
building.
this is where the agreement also comes into play in terms of how the funds are gonna be, like spelling out how the funds are to be used, what they're to be used for. Wanting to make sure that it does align with the mill's mission, but also being clear that it's for the forge, right? That it's not going to, we're not gonna muddy what the ultimate funds get used for. We wanna make sure the forge is, this is partly because of EDA reporting requirements as well, and making sure that we're clearly reporting that. There are a lot of checks here to where I think ultimately and I don't want to speak for John or the mill because they're well represented here, but it does mandate kind of a necessary accounting difference, reporting difference. There's a lot of things that the mill's going to have to set up to show that this is an independent project. So I think eventually, we're kind of have a virtual separation in terms of all the accountability that the mill has to show here. And if this is the structure that they think is best.
Yeah, and Deborah, to your point too, you'll find in the agreement, there's references to the mill's mission, and that was put in there at the recommendation of our council, so we wouldn't run into any issues with unrelated business revenue. But to your point as well, as contemplated with the Lilly Endowment grant, we are looking at different options on how we want to hold that for the very reasons that you raised.
okay, so I'm, again, speaking because this is an agreement that's drafted up by the city, even though it's obviously an agreement. So I'm asking, is there not, since it's anticipated that this may eventually go in this direction anyhow in terms of a separate entity, or again, a subsidiary, right, of some kind, that, is that not what you were just saying?
No.
Okay,
no,
maybe I
sorry.
misunderstood.
When I said virtually, I just mean but the accounting difference they're reporting. And in fact, this cannot be part of, so we were talking about the mill may for real estate holding purposes create a different LLC.
I think
This
I get-
project.
Yeah, I think I get your question, because you're referring to, at the very beginning, there was reference to a separate entity.
Right,
Essentially, the mill has become that separate entity.
okay,
We just kind of swapped out.
right,
What
the
was-
separate
yes.
501c3 from an existing one.
Yeah. Sorry,
Oh, that's fine,
lost
and I
it.
understand that, again, as long as it's a relationship of the mission of the nonprofit and it's all
Yeah.
consistent, you don't need to have a separate entity to separate that, but just, again, trying to kind of look into the future if it seems like there's any divergence, I don't know, again, I was just trying to make sure I understood what you had said.
In this case, there just can't be different ownership, so you are still required to own it for the 20 years. So there can't really be an evolution of ownership in that regard until the grant expires.
Okay.
So it'd be relatively far. in the
I just
future.
was trying to make sure that the agreement, again, 20-year agreement, is being sufficiently foresighted in terms of covering its bases of where the direction is headed, so,
You just brought up a question.
okay.
Is this grant got a burn off, or is it a burn off period, or is it if something screws up, we gotta pay it all back?
There are very strict requirements from the EDA. There are circumstances in which repayment is possible under the grant terms. That's why we're trying to be as meticulous as possible about
Okay.
following those procedures as much as possible.
Yeah, if you're not operating the building for the intended purposes of the grant, they could, have some kind of compliance action. If you sell it within that 20-year period, there's a formula on how much you
On
pay
how much.
them.
Okay, so there
You
is
have to pay back the grant.
Yeah, there's a period of time over the 20-year period where if it acts right for, which it will for on our end for the 20 years, but yeah, there is incremental periods and formulations in that particular grant that identifies.
We should also just note that this is why we also keep in close contact with the EDA.
Right.
So that they know what we're doing and that we're kind of forecasting what we're doing. They can give us guidance on that, so we're far afield from compliance measures.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners? Anybody for public comment this evening on resolution 24-68? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of resolution 24-68.
I'll second.
All in favor, we have a first and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
It passes
you.
unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Larry and Jane, for getting this over the finish line.
Still got November, right?
Okay.
Good deal.
Sign some leases.
There you go. Perfect.
Next
Thank you, guys.
item of business is 24-69, approval of change order package number 4 for Hopewell Phase 1 East. Looks like we have Mr. Ayton here to speak to this.
Good evening, Roy Ayton with the City Engineering Department. So this is our Hopewell East project that's kind of winding down at this point, but there is one change order package number 4 that I'd like to present this evening. It encumbers 13 change orders total. This project was originally awarded, as you are aware, to Milestone Contractors. Previous change orders were in the amount of $322,206.20. Our current authorized amount on the contract is $13,695,491.10. This package of change orders, the complete package of 13 change orders, is for $221,697.91. That'll be added to the contract amount. The RDC portion of that, though, is going to be $162,332.93. Also encumbered in here will be the Parks and Recreation Department will cover $44,744.98 of these change orders, and the City of Bloomington Utilities Department will cover $14,620 of them. The combination of all 13 change orders will also add 18 days to our contract amount, which will move our final completion date to November 22nd, 2024. Out of the 13 change orders, I'll quickly go through any of these. If there's any questions or anything, please feel free to stop me. Change order number 11's on here, and it's for pipe quantity adjustments, just some discrepancies between what the original plans were and what were needed, and that's in the amount of $19,485. Change order 22 is for additional grading. This comes up in 3 of these change orders. The original plan for Hopewell East to build the infrastructure really only concentrated on the infrastructure and didn't concentrate on the lots themselves. So the lots, this is the final grading to get the lots up there, so that's why it's a scope change on this one. And for change order 22, that's $41,009.98 for the additional grading. Change order 23, once again, just changing some of the storm sewer casting types, $4,615.04. Change order 24, this is one of 2 change orders this evening that I'll have to do with topsoil. As you may recall, the Hopewell East development was predominantly parking lots and buildings. Originally, they had thought they could reuse a lot of the topsoil that was out there. There just wasn't enough topsoil. So we have added some topsoil to stabilize the lots. This change order 24 is for stabilizing Madison Street topsoil for $5,817. Change order 25, there was a plan discrepancy and an error in submissions, problem with the project. Some of the curbing had to be removed and redone at a different elevation. That is for $1,500. Change order 26 on the original bollards that we had done, I think it was change order package number 1. There was a count discrepancy in the amount of bollards that were needed. We had to adjust that, so it's an additional $5,175.08 for the bollards. Tree grates. This is one where the actual line items in the contract itself indicate that there's 34 tree grates, but as you count them, there are actually 41. So this is adding those additional 7 tree grates for a total of $44,744.98. The tree grates are being picked up by the Parks Department. So they're not on the resolution here, but they're in the package still because they're part of the contract. Change order 28 is for communication cables. The contract did cover putting in the communication cables to get, or the conduits to get our wireless access points and our cameras set up, but we did not pull the cables through it. So this will be $12,031.27 to actually pull the communication cables through. Change order 29 is for limestone block caulking in the amount of $1,672.10. Change order 30 is for HMA patching for City of Bloomington Utilities Department for $14,620. And this is during our project, the City of Bloomington Utilities installed replaced a water main in Rogers Street. They had to redo the surface of it. We found it was just economical for us to put it into our package, but they are picking up this cost, so that $14,620 will be paid for by the City of Bloomington Utilities. Change order number 31, I want to bring some attention to. This is a scope change for the project itself, and a lot of this has to do with when the project is actually being completed. Between this period, we'll have the park, the Hopewell Commons, but it'll be a while before there's development that's brought into the area. So there's this initiative kind of to activate the area, bring people in, get them to use the area. And it was recommended that addition of pickleball courts in one of the lots right now, just to get the area activated. We were going to do the site work through our contract for $22,423.30, which would be to level the area on the Hopewell East where the pickleball courts will go, and then we will apply the asphalt base. And then the Parks Department will come in and they will bring it, they have a kind of a assembly of squares they can put down to make kind of a removable pickleball courts and the nets and everything else, and they'll establish the pickleball courts and do the maintenance on that. Then change order number 32 is once again another topsoil one. This is to add topsoil for all the development lots that are out there. The seeding and the mulching is already included in the contract. We just don't think that the seed that we're going to lay down is going to catch without topsoil. It's no organics out there. And the last one, thank you for bearing with me, change order 33, and that's for concrete curb on Rogers Street. The initial project for Hopewell East didn't include the lot at 413 West 2nd Street, which is also a redevelopment lot. This, while we were out there, we realized it was easier just to extend the curb right now and go ahead and eliminate that drive that people were using off Rogers Street. So this is the additional money for that. We've kind of since then incorporated that lot into the Hopewell East, but that's an additional $11,000 for that curb. Once again, the total of the change order is $221,697.91. The RDC's portion of that in the resolution, I believe, is $162,332.93. And I'm available for questions.
Can I just really quickly note that there was a change since the packet went out in the amounts. There were just some scrivener's errors in the original amounts. So originally in the packet it says the RDC's portion is $162,332.85. So there was a missing 8 cents to that. So that increased by 8 cents in the version that Roy is presenting now. So we have a version that should be updated to $162,332.93. Additionally, the total overall amount in terms of how it was added in the original report was off by just by this essentially the same amount. So the adjusted total price of increasing it by 8 cents to correct that error will be $13,917,189.01.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
Are we done?
I'm done with mine.
No. Are we done with the change orders, in your opinion, after
Right,
seeing
no.
the thing?
We will be coming back to the, I know for sure with time adjustments.
Okay.
We had covered 18 additional days in this one. There are still 10 days additional that they're asking.
Okay.
That we're still working with. That'll form into a change order. I'll come back. The project itself is about 95% complete, but there are still some change orders out there that we're still negotiating with them on. And those change orders will come. I don't anticipate anything large. I think you've seen the bulk of the change orders by this point, but I'm still working on a few more, so.
So there will be something coming back, and then
You will see me again, yes.
Okay. And then time frame as far as what we're looking at on our overall budget. I mean, we added 2, so. Topsoil, grass, it's not gonna grow till spring, as much as we'd like for it to. And are we going to fence off the areas to keep it from public utilization? Are we gonna take care of, and we're putting the pickleball courts in, which is a great idea to activate. Is that gonna go in, so it's prior to spring, from a time frame standpoint?
Stabilization will still have to be done at this point, so we'll have to get something down on there to start to grow some grass seeds. I think the seeds that we have, there's a mix rye and others, the rye will come up, which is usually what we do in a fall crop.
Okay.
And then in the spring, another crop. I have to stabilize the sites to get through winter. I don't want to leave bare dirt.
Right.
So we will attempt to do it. Construction-wise, they're looking to be complete within 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
So even though our completion date will officially be December, I think we'll see those lots stabilized here in October. So that should give me enough growing
Right.
season, we're hoping. But you're right, it'll be caught under warranty, and if it doesn't catch, we'll reseed in the spring.
But, and my question specifically is, are we planning on opening the park, doing a dedication along with activation of the park, or are we looking to still have that area held under construction? Mr. Street?
Hello, Tim Street. I'm the Parks Director for the City of Bloomington. Yeah, great question. Roy and I have been talking about this and working on this. So the temporary pickleball court is our idea to drive some positive use to the park immediately, basically as soon as we can get it. Knowing that that lot won't develop for a couple of years, using temporary intermediate asphalt, buying these courts that are modular that we can then remove somewhere else in the future. Those will be connected with asphalt or concrete connections, so you won't have to track across the grass to use those. The ongoing care of how well the grass establishes is something we're going to have to talk about. We are not planning a big activation event this fall.
Okay.
We're going into winter. It's not the best time to be promoting a lot of outdoor activities and things like that. That said, I do think people will go there to play pickleball because we get that question all the time. We are likely looking at a bigger celebratory type event with the RDC, with multiple city departments in April or maybe March when the weather is breaking. With Milestone as well, we've discussed that with the Office of the Mayor, with Milestone. The ongoing care of some of the grass is something we're going to have to talk and determine based on how it comes in, I think. Typically that would go over to Public Works for mowing. How frequently are we going to mow that? Are we going to mow it to keep it just controlled? Are we going to mow it for use? I think those are some ongoing discussions we need to have. And then what was the last thing I was going to answer for you there? It's left me.
But you answered the primary question, is we are going to open the park this year.
Oh, yes, sorry, that was it. So Milestone, while they're gonna reach substantial completion here probably in a few weeks, they are planning to leave their fence until we're through more towards final completion, which
Okay.
will probably be, what are we thinking now, late November?
Yeah.
Or maybe even into December. Knowing that there's still trees to be planted, there's still some things that were outside of their control for substantial completion that we're waiting on. We didn't want to unfence it and still have punch list items and final completion items going on in there. So we're not sure of the exact date, but it will stay fenced until probably, I'd have to guess early December. Yep. We've told them we're not in a rush to get that down.
The reason as far as getting into that question from a security standpoint and,
Yep, yeah, I'm
Since we're
very
still-
much thinking about that, and Ann and I have been talking about, there is still, where does one security contract end, and then the parks one, where will that pick
Exactly.
up, to make sure we're not duplicating services there, but at the same time, it's gonna be a little heavier through the winter than when it just switches to parks, which I think is good, to help us bridge that gap.
you hit the exact thing I was looking at in regards to that from a security standpoint, to maintain what's been built and how we're gonna do it, so,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question. I took all these change orders as one way or the other, we gotta do it, so it's hard to question or comment on it, other than the pickleball courts. So for whatever reason, I kinda drilled down on that. Is there any chance that these courts will just be permanent and you won't move them?
I would say no. This is on one of the lots that is anticipated to sell, and that is why we're trying to sort of make a smart decision about how we're investing taxpayer money or TIF money into this, rather, in that using intermediate asphalt, which we expect to last long enough, but is not the same big expense as putting in permanent courts, and then having the Parks Department purchase these courts, which we could then potentially repurpose elsewhere.
Well, I anticipated that to be your answer. So, once you provide it to the public and then you take it away, you'll have your hands full. So, there needs to be a plan going forward as to how you're gonna offset that.
And we are working in our Parks Capital Master Plan. We're entering a Parks Master Plan year next year, actually, for a 5-year master plan. And we know part of that will be a community needs assessment. We hear from a lot of different groups about different things we need in different places, so we want to, do our due diligence between equitable engagement and statistically valid surveying to determine exactly what and where we want to put things. Certainly more pickleball is something we've heard a lot of, and is something we're looking at developing, not necessarily at this site, because that's real estate that is meant to redevelop into housing and all of the goals we've been after in this project, but somewhere. So the hope is that can bridge the gap, help drive positive use, fulfill a community desire right now. By the time that's rolling off, we'll have a plan to reinvest elsewhere.
And so for these temporary courts, you've got the wherewithal and the budget to maintain them?
Yes.
Because we don't want the pushback because we didn't maintain them.
Yeah, we continue to work with the controller and with the ESD on long-term funding for Hopewell in terms of the parks maintenance and some of the creative ideas we're working on there.
Thank you.
Yep.
No other comments or questions from commissioners, or any public comment on resolution 2469? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion, please.
I'll make a motion to approve 2469 as presented.
Second.
And is that including the amended
The amended dollars.
8 cents?
Mhm.
Okay, just checking.
As with the
How about
amended
I just
budget.
give you 8 cents?
That would be Roy.
Royal mail it to
They
you.
won't let me do that, though. I
Yeah.
have to do it.
Okay, we've got a first and a second.
You have to use a credit card so we can track it.
I'm sorry.
All in favor, you can have the jokes, we gotta finish the resolution. So, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimously approved. Thank you.
Appreciate it,
And
Roy.
8 cents, again, people
And
can follow
Roy,
up.
Try not to come back with too big a bite at the apple the next time.
I've been putting up a heck of a fight. So
Thank you.
I'll keep it up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there'll be some day when we'll just borrow you from a room, so,
That may not help. I'll pound on the door.
Okay, we are moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is Resolution 2470, approval of additional funding for site furnishings at Hopewell. Is that our current audience gonna speak to us
I
on
was
that?
gonna try to handle that. So, okay.
Me too, I can't do it.
Yeah, I'll just to start off, previously, the commission approved the resolution for purchasing the Hopewell furniture. A portion of that was for a company called Landscape Forms, which $76,532.64. We received the furniture, we've gotten the invoice. The invoice actually was off by $2,200. There was an additional charge on the invoice. And their amount was $78,732.64. What we're doing with Resolution 2470 is we're asking to bump that amount up $2,200 so that we can pay that final invoice. The discrepancy between the original quote amount that was based on the original resolution and this amount was we had the furniture, we had some holes drilled into them so they could be anchored into the park like that. So there was an additional charge that came through. So this evening, we're asking for an additional $2,200.
For holes, just saying.
Yeah, that's for all the
things
holes.
that are missing.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but you're right.
Okay. Any comments or questions from commissioners?
So were the holes not designed at the beginning, and so the vendor did not know to bill for it?
It was a factor of where the 4 table legs came down, the way they interpreted it, where the holes needed to be. We actually needed another set of holes to appropriately anchor into the system we're putting below the pavers. And so that necessitated in process them drilling, it's this HDPE plastic, so they drill out and reinforce some of those holes for the cables to go through and anchor to the ground.
So it's not a vendor error?
No, it was just an interpretation as we went through, realizing one system to the next to make them compatible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments from commissioners? If not, any public comment on resolution 24-70? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion, please.
I'll move approval of 24-70.
I'll second.
I have a first and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Next item on our agenda is 24-71, an addendum to an agreement with Vet Environmental Engineering for environmental services at Hopewell West. Who's going to speak to that?
Either one. Rock, paper, scissors.
I can speak to it if you want, and then you can fill in the gaps. So as you know, one of the things we've been doing is conducting a NEPA study at the Hopewell site, and part of that review process, we've retained VET Environmental locally to do that part of the process for us. They completed a large part of the review. They were able to submit it to IDEM, which is a necessary part of the process. We have to get approval from IDEM just to basically the plan of attack for remediating all the environmental conditions there, which I think we discussed with you before. IDEM did come back and requested a few additional items. And in response to that, so some additional testing and some additional just monitoring of some of the results. As a result of that, VET agreed to do those services as well. And so there's a change order to add those services here. A large part of what the additional testing is certain types of groundwater sampling. So when we did the groundwater sampling, it was over the summer. We had a very dry summer. And so one of the things IDEM requested is that after a substantial rain, we do another testing to make sure that the groundwater is a little bit higher, see if there's any contaminants in the groundwater, which is not that unusual. And then there was also a couple of other monitoring just for different types of contaminants, I believe, in the groundwater as well that IDEM wanted to see. And so this would result, so this requires an additional mobilization, additional testing, additional equipment by VET. So there's a change here of $13,364 for those additional services. And what we'll basically have is VET will be ready to mobilize at the next, probably in this season at this point, depending on how much rain we've already received. At the next substantial rain, they need to test within 24 hours of that happening. So they'll mobilize, go out to the site, and perform some of that additional testing. And is there anything you want to add? Okay.
Happy to answer questions.
Any questions or comments from commissioners?
We won't know if there's any additional, until that testing's done, we will not know if there needs to be any additional remediation.
We don't know. Yeah, there's something it could reveal. I think more than anything, what it reveals is flow across the site, which we have a reasonable understanding of already. We don't anticipate any really shocking things, but you never know what's going to come out of it. So we'll just have to look at the results. But we have a sense of what the historical use is, where obviously we found contamination already on the site. None of it's surprising. Historical gas station where the hospital had their tanks over time, those kind of things. The flow of the property, honestly, topographically, is fairly clear from looking at topographical. Now, IDEM is not as familiar with this area, so from IDEM's understanding, they want to know and have the test results to show the flow. But in terms of people that know this geographic area and have looked at it in the phase 1 and phase 2, we have a pretty good idea. So I'm just, from our conversations with VT, I don't think that they anticipate seeing anything new. It's really going to be if the concentration levels change at all to point out. Now, one of the things we will say is, our plan's accounting for kind of delineating the maximum ranges for certain types of contamination. None of this really is on the nearest part of the core site, which is kind of our immediate concern, because we have a potential to close on that particular deal, and that's what's putting some time pressure on it. It's really, where the historical gas station was and things like that. So one of the things we're kind of figuring out with the plan we're submitting as well, and what you'll see coming back to you, is as we come up with a plan to delineate where the full amount of contamination there is and what we'll have to do to remediate that. So that'll be something you'll definitely see more of. Sorry,
Right
I
now-
don't mean to give such a long-winded
No,
answer, but
it's
yeah.
good. It comes down to IDEM, we need this in order to get IDEM approval to move
Yeah.
forward.
We literally do not have a choice at this
Right.
point.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's.
And I think you
just wanna
partially
clarify
answered
that.
the question. So this does or does not postpone the core closing?
It does.
It does.
Well, it does from the standpoint of we need to complete it before IDEM's going to sign off on it. So really, it's a little weather dependent. We're still in talks with IDEM, just to be in terms of.
Recording stopped.
Timed out, we're done.
Do it wait for because we still have cats. So.
Yeah.
it's okay.
Okay. No, I lost. We already have. There are portions at IDEM. IDEM has a let me just give you the high level. IDEM has a car specialist who's been out of the office for the last month and a half. And so we need to have a conversation with them, a follow-up conversation with their car specialist still. So there was a delay anyways. Now, some of this is going to be dependent on weather in terms of when VT can mobilize. So I can't tell you for sure 100% this is going to further delay it, but it's likely the delay is going to be from IDEM's ability to sign off to us having a mandatory notice period, which is required by HUD under this environmental analysis. So those are the two triggering events right now that are dictating the timeline for closing on core. Everything else I think we have largely addressed. But one of the things we have been clear just in our communications with IDEM is we want to do everything possible to remove their barriers to being able to sign off. So every time we're talking to them, we're trying to get as much information from them to be able to sign off on it. The likely delay, October's a fairly rainy month, so there would be likely a couple weeks delay. But again, because we have to have that follow-up conversation with IDEM, it's a delay that was going to happen anyways.
So, and I get this is an IDEM requirement. We're probably between a rock and a hard place here, but if we keep delaying the closing, does that will that have any impact on getting the deal done?
We would like to not tempt fate. I mean, we're up against a deadline. I mean, this is something we're trying to communicate with our Brinshore and BHA partners as we go, so that they're very clear on what's happening. And trying to keep in communication. I don't know, Anna, if you've had recent communications or anything that you'd like to.
I had a meeting with Brinshore and BHA today, so just bringing them fully up to speed. Again, talking through all of the issues. I mean, I think we've teed it up very well to move forward as soon as IDEM says you're good to go. So you need 15-day notice period, and then an additional 15-day. So we're talking about a 30-day notice period. Before we can get the authority to use grant funds, and they cannot have any ground disturbing activity until that happens. But I still feel confident that it will happen this calendar year.
Yeah, so, and which means also we're not yet bumping up against the hardest possible deadline for them, where they would, for Bryn Shore and BHA, where they would need to go back to the state and negotiate an extension.
And we
That's-
don't want them to have to do that.
Yeah,
What is
correct.
that hard deadline?
It's the end of the year.
Okay,
is my
that's what I
understanding.
thought, so just wondering.
They need site control by the end of the year.
Right.
Man.
Yeah, you've got something we can work through paper-wise if necessary,
Okay.
so have full faith in that, so. Okay.
Any public comment on resolution 2471? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I guess it's my turn. I'll move approval of 24-71.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously, thank you. We are now on to 24-72, approval of community development block grant funding for physical improvements to 221 North Rogers Street. Looks like we have Mr. Swinney here to speak to that, thank you.
Yeah, Matt Swain and Program Manager for Housing and Construction Projects. This is a project with Centerstone to repair and repaint the exterior at 221 North Rogers. So we were just bringing the agreement to you guys for approval and to have it, out in the public for review to see.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from commissioners?
CDBG funding, so it's really not coming out of the TIF.
No.
This
No,
is
it's
part
just
of the
an agreement. It's
citizen
part of the grant.
participation plan required by HUD.
Okay.
So the RDCs are just for public purposes.
Right,
The
public
RDCs
purpose, I just wanna make sure everybody's aware
Formality.
as we come through that, you know.
Yeah.
in
This is
a pub-
not
in a
coming
pub-
from the TIF.
Exactly, yeah, we spend a lot of money from the TIF tonight, so,
Okay.
yeah, just
Time
kind
for-
of,
This
very,
is all from the federal.
yeah, and it's got to do, it's for the Recovery Center on Rogers Street.
Yes, sir.
In order to continue to maintain the exterior of the wood structure that has basically been somewhat of the historic fabric of that particular area.
Yep.
So, just wanna make sure that the right building, right reason, and then, as we look forward, this'll keep it in good shape for what, another 10 years or so? Cause it is a wood
Yeah.
structure, correct?
Right.
That has to be maintained. Okay. All right,
Okay.
appreciate it, thank you.
It's your turn, Randy.
Well, we
Yep.
need public
Public
comment.
comment.
Public comment.
Mhm.
Seeing no public, I will in fact entertain a motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve resolution 24-72 as
Second.
presented.
We have a first and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
That is all on our agenda for tonight. Anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
So moved.
All in favor, let's say goodnight. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.